Good morning. My name is Cimaszewski, and I'm going to present to you today our work paper on cryptographically-secured domain validation. So I did this work with my other fantastic colleagues at Princeton University, as well as one collaborator from the ISRG Birge-Lee. So HTTPS encrypts billions of connections on the internet every single day. But ironically, the certificates that HTTPS uses are issued using an insecure plaintext challenge response protocol that has been shown vulnerable to network attacks by a large body of previous work. In short, a certificate authority, or CA for short, verifies ownership of a domain name by performing an HTTP or DNS lookup of some network resource for a token that it requests. And if that request is fulfilled, it will issue a certificate to that requester. But an adversary who can intercept or redirect traffic to these resources, such as in the case of a BGP hijack or a DNS poisoning attack, can complete the challenge and gain a certificate for a domain name that it does not actually own. And in turn, this enables very sophisticated impersonation attacks that fool even the TLS layer. There have been many approaches and attempts to secure the web PKI, but none of them fully close this gap of lack of cryptographic assurance. At the CA side, there have been a number of approaches. There's been certificate transparency, which is actually in use and required by major browsers. And this is a read-only public log of all issued certificates. But this only detects misissuances and doesn't actually prevent them. There's multi-perspective issuance corroboration, or MPIC, which involves probing the challenge protocol over multiple different independent network paths, but this is merely a heuristic defense and is not cryptographically secure. And lastly, there are DNS record type called CAA records, which I'll discuss later on, that give the ability to domain owners to constrain issuances of their certificates, but the semantics of these are incomplete to actually prevent attacks. At the client side, most of the proposed solutions have failed due to difficulties of deployment and the challenge of securing every single connection. For example, Dane required DNSSEC at every connecting client and never never achieved good browser support. And HPKP key pinning was eventually decommissioned because of denial of service issues and risk of bad keyed pins. So our insight here is that the best approach is to attack the problem from the issuance side at the certificate authority, where the fundamental vulnerability lies. So in this work, we propose a framework for cryptographically secured domain validation. And this involves two key pillars. One is signaling the secure issuance policy. So a domain owner publishes in a CAA record a secure issuance policy that the certificate authority then looks up through an authenticated DNS lookup. And secondly, once there is a secure policy present, the certificate authority is required to use a defined secure method and cannot fall back to an insecure one. And I'll go into how this design is backwards compatible, prevents downgrade attacks, and is effective even in a state of partial deployment. So to go into the mechanism of providing a declarative security policy, we use an existing mechanism known as Certificate Authority Authorization Records, or CAA, which is a DNS record type that enables domain owners to specify authorized CAs and additional policies for issuances of their certificates. And this reuses an existing workflow because CAA checking is already required by CAs for every single issuance. And we exploit semantics of the CAA record to implement this today. So we implement a new tag known as security, and we use something called the critical bit, this 128 value, which requires that a CA that reads this record to either support its functionality or to fail close and blanket deny issuance. This enables security under partial deployment so that non-implementing CAs reject issuance instead of downgrading to an insecure issuance method. One big security gap that we identified during this work was that actually DNSSEC validation of the lookups of CAA records was not required by CAs. So a domain's defined CAA policy could be suppressed simply by a manipulation, spoofing, or black holing of this record by an attacker. So we performed measurements where we configured a test domain with the DNSSEC invalid CAA records, and we actually identified 2 of the top 7 certificate authorities that issued certificates, even in the face of this DNSSEC invalid zone state. This was DigiCert and GoDaddy. So as a corollary to our secure policy definition, we also require that CAs must perform authenticated lookups DNSSEC validation of the policies. Second is enforcement of the secure policy through using a validation method that is actually cryptographically secure. And the approach we use here is to use existing trust roots in DNS and add them into existing validation workflows. So these either repurpose an existing validation method to use cryptography in the case of the secure DNS record change and HTTP validation over TLS using either DNSSEC signatures or an existing HTTPS certificate, or they add an orthogonal authorization check in a separate record for a key or account ID that the certificate authority can query separately to the validation challenge. And these, one design principle here is full backwards compatibility with existing CA browser form requirements. So all certificate authorities are required to use methods that are defined in this document, known as the baseline requirements, or BRs for short. And it's a long, arduous process to revise these, involving multiple months of ballot proposal and voting and review. So this design enables usage of a secure method out of the box, still remaining compliant with audit requirements. So we wanted to see how feasible this design was in the current CA ecosystem today. So for this method, we examined Let's Encrypt issued domains over roughly one cycle of certificate renewal, 90 days, involving almost 401 million unique domains. And we performed full tree climbing CA lookups for the presence of a CA record and also record DNSSEC signing status. So surprisingly, we found that actually a higher than we expected number of domains, over 13%, have a relevant CA record at some point in the DNS hierarchy. And this indicates that actually a significant number of domains are already using some sort of issuance policies today. We found that 11.7 million domains are DNSSEC signed, so roughly consistent with ecosystem measurements. But this still shows that millions of domains have a key infrastructure prerequisite for using CryptoDB. And lastly, we identified almost 700,000 domains that have both prerequisites and we're also using more sophisticated CA policies in their records. And we term these as ready-to-go users, users that could easily modify their existing records and be able to use this workflow today. And this included several high-stakes domains, including Debian.org, the Bitcoin Core project, and torproject.net. Second, we performed a formal analysis to prove that this design provides the properties that we claim it does. So we model in the verifier Tamarin a scenario where a Dolovyao attacker that has control of the network but cannot modify or forge cryptographic signatures attempts attacks on various components of this validation and issuance workflow. And we proved 2 key properties. One is that an attacker cannot obtain a certificate without satisfying the owner's secure policy. And second is that the attacker cannot suppress the secure policy or force a downgrade to an insecure validation method. Lastly, we performed an evaluation of real-world network attacks in the presence of our framework. So we have a test victim domain hosted in an AS and an adversary in a separate network, performing various BGP-enabled network hijacks to attack different components of the validation workflow. So the attacker attempts a suppression of the CA policy by black holing or forging the CA response. It attempts to hijack the DNS challenge altogether, and it also attempts to force fallback to an insecure method by requesting a lower security validation method. And in all of these attack scenarios, CryptoDB blocked all of the tested attacks without disrupting legitimate issuance or a good ones. And the last major contribution of our work was our involvement with the standards and WebPKI ecosystem bodies. So we wanted to translate our work into real security improvements for the existing WebPKI. This was in the form of 2 ballots at the CA Browser Forum, which is the governing body for all publicly trusted certificate authorities. 1 ballot enforced mandatory DNSSEC validation for all validation-related DNSSEC lookups. So this ballot, in effect, remedied the attack against the 2 earlier certificate authorities in the previous slide. And a second ballot enforced consistent processing of CA parameters beyond the initial tag value. And lastly, we also are working on an internet draft of the security CA tag and the associated validation methods. This has been adopted by the LAMPS working. So in conclusion, we present cryptographic domain validation, which is incrementally deployable, confers full security benefits to any adopter today, and is also fully compliant with existing CA Browser Forum ecosystem guidelines. And this design has already influenced standards and improved the security of the WebPKI. And I encourage you to read the paper for more details if you want to see more interworkings of WebPKI CAs or the working of this policy. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions later on.